The polished halls of the Lumeth Conclave stretched endlessly ahead. Their walls were carved from stone that held light rather than reflecting it. Aris Hale walked alone. His footsteps were swallowed by the vast, quiet space. The gallery rose on either side in sweeping arcs. Alcoves lined the walls. Lumeth scholars once displayed their greatest works of art and philosophy there. Now those alcoves stood empty, waiting. He had learned to read stillness during the Abyssal War. Quiet before an attack, quiet after a bombing, quiet in the bunkers when the power failed and the only sound was 40,000 people breathing in the dark. The hush of the conclave was different. It was the silence of a civilization that had never needed to shout. 50 years had passed since the Abyssal fleet descended on Earth. 50 years since humanity clawed its way back from extinction by burying itself in rubble and radiation and fighting with whatever came to hand. The galaxy remembered. The galaxy pitied. To the Arae, humanity was a wounded animal. Those avian beings saw humans as harmless and broken. They felt pity for a shattered society. The Draxis held a similar view. That reptilian species was territorial by nature. They saw only weakness where strength had once stood. Aris used that perception. It made him invisible. He adjusted his jacket. A simple thing of gray fabric, it had cost more than most people on Earth made in a month. The jacket was a prop. The calm expression was a prop. The entire careful posture of a neutral broker, a man with no stake in the outcome, was a prop he had spent 20 years perfecting. The crisis involved a narrow band of asteroids. The Helios Belt was rich in crystalline stones. These stones could focus thought into force. They were called psionic amplifiers. The avian Arae believed the resources belonged to everyone. The reptilian Draxis claimed the belt by right of proximity. Both were posturing for war. The Lumeth wanted to stop it. Aris reached the end of the gallery and stopped before a door that was not quite a door. It was a seam in the stone, a line so fine his eyes could barely track it. He waited. The Lumeth did not knock. The seam parted. The chamber beyond was round and intimate, lit by a soft glow from nowhere and everywhere. A single figure stood at its center, her back to him, studying a holographic map of the Helios Belt that rotated slowly in the air before her. Her skin was the color of moonstone, pale and luminous. When she turned, her eyes were pools of calm intelligence. "Broker Hale," Ilara said. Her voice was soft, musical, perfectly modulated. "I am grateful you came." "Senior Scholar Ilara," Aris acknowledged, inclining his head. "The Lumeth have always been generous hosts." She gestured to a seating arrangement that seemed to grow from the floor, low cushions of some shimmering material. He sat. She sat across from him, her movements precise and fluid. "You have reviewed the situation," she stated. It was not a question. "I have." "Then you understand the elegance of the solution I propose." She touched the hologram. The map split into 3 colored zones. "Shared access. Each party takes a rotation of 6 standard months. The Lumeth oversee distribution and ensure compliance. No one starves, no one fights, everyone wins." Aris looked at the colored zones. They were neat. They were balanced. They were a beautiful lie on a holographic table. "It will fail," he said. Ilara's brow furrowed. The movement was small, barely perceptible. On a face as serene as hers, it was a thunderstorm. "Explain." "The Draxis see territory as absolute," Aris said. "They do not share, they occupy. To them, a rotation is not a compromise. It is a temporary loss that must be corrected. The moment your first rotation ends, they will fortify the belt. The Arae will see that as aggression. They will respond in kind. Within 2 cycles, you have a shooting war." "And the elegant solution?" "It assumes everyone wants peace as much as you do." Ilara was silent for a long moment. Her fingers traced the edge of the hologram. The colored zones dissolved into a scatter of individual asteroids. "You have a proposal." "I do." Aris reached into his jacket and produced a data pad. He placed it on the low table between them. "Staggered mining rights, 20-year leases with performance clauses, mutual defense obligations that require both parties to contribute ships and resources to a joint security force, dispute resolution through binding arbitration by a third party." Ilara picked up the data pad. Her eyes moved across the text. He watched her expression shift from curiosity to skepticism to something that might have been disappointment. "This is needlessly convoluted," she observed. "It is workable. It is ugly. It is a tangle of contingencies and loopholes and escape clauses. It does not solve the problem, it manages it." "Managing the problem is the solution," Aris countered. You cannot fix two species that have been hating each other for 300 years. You can give them a framework where their hate does not turn into a war that kills 1,000,000 people. Arae set the datapad down. You humans have a strange relationship with conflict. We have had a lot of practice. She looked at him and he felt the weight of her gaze. The Lumeth were scholars, not warriors. They had never fought a war. They had never needed to. Their civilization had risen through cooperation and dialogue and the patient accumulation of knowledge. They looked at the galaxy and saw a problem to be solved. Aris looked at the galaxy and saw a burning building with people still inside. "I will consider your proposal," Arae said. There was no warmth in her voice. She was being polite, fulfilling the forms of hospitality. She thought his plan was beneath her. He did not care. He had been underestimated by better people than a moonstone scholar who had never heard a bomb fall. The meeting ended. He walked back through the polished halls, past the empty alcoves, past the quiet that was not quite peaceful. His communicator buzzed as he reached the gallery, a tight beam signal encrypted from Earth. Not from the civilian government, he knew the signature. He stepped into a side alcove, away from any listening devices the Lumeth might have seated in the walls. The message was brief, 3 lines of text that burned into his retinas. The Lumeth are not what they seem. Secure the Helios Belt for human interests. Do not reveal our capacity. He read it twice, then he deleted it. The communicator went back into his pocket. He stood there for a long moment, looking at his reflection in the dark glass of a viewport that looked out on the void. The glass showed him a man in a gray jacket, his face calm, his eyes tired. Behind that reflection, the ghost of a world that was supposed to be dead. Earth had survived the Abyssal War by doing things that no one talked about, by building weapons in secret, by stockpiling resources that the galaxy thought humanity no longer possessed, by learning the hard lesson that peace was a luxury and luxuries had to be earned. The galaxy thought humans were broken. They were wrong. Aris turned away from the viewport and began walking back toward the Conclave's main entrance. He had a treaty to negotiate, a war to prevent, and apparently a secret to keep. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had been invisible for so long that he had forgotten how to be seen. The Lumeth Conclave did not believe in hurry. Its corridors curved with the slow grace of water, and its light fell in sheets of pale gold that seemed to weigh nothing at all. Scholar Arae walked those corridors with her hands clasped behind her back. Her robes whispered against the polished stone. She thought about the human. His name was Aris Hale. She had read his file 3 times. The Abyssal War had carved deep channels through his species. He carried those scars the way a river carries silt, beneath the surface, invisible until you tasted the grit. He had survived. He had adapted. He had learned to stand in rooms where everyone pitied him and turn that pity into leverage. She had to admit it was a kind of brilliance, but it was a brutal kind, a clumsy kind. The Lumeth did not build things that way. Arae paused at an alcove window and looked out over the Conclave's central garden. Below her, a single crystalline tree rose from a pool of still water. Its branches caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. That tree had taken 70 years to grow. It was perfect. It was irreplaceable. It was, in every way that mattered, a complete expression of what her people believed, that true craftsmanship required patience, and that patience was a form of reverence. She turned from the window and resumed walking. The human had proposed staggered leases, joint security patrols, arbitration panels. It was a tangled knot of compromises, each one ugly but functional like a patch on a cracked vessel. When she had asked him why he would not simply accept the Lumeth shared access solution, elegant, simple, fair, he had looked at her with those tired eyes and said, "Because the Draxis don't care about fair, they care about theirs." Arae had no answer for that. She still did not. The doors to the High Anchorite's chamber opened as she approached. They sensed her presence before she could announce herself. She stepped inside. Thuron sat at the center of the room. He was cross-legged on a cushion of woven silver, his eyes closed, his hands resting on his knees. He was old. He was not old in the way humans grew old, with crumbling bones and fading sight. He was old in the way mountains grew old, accumulating weight and stillness until becoming part of the landscape. His face was smooth. His skin was the color of pale ash. His crest of crystalline filaments lay flat against his scalp, pulsing with a faint inner light. He did not open his eyes. "You are troubled, Scholar Arae." She bowed. The human is difficult, high anchorite. He rejects simplicity. He insists on complexity, on layers upon layers of safeguards and contingencies. It feels like suspicion. Thuron's lips curved slightly. He has earned the right to suspicion. His species was nearly erased. 50 years ago, Arae said. The galaxy moves on. Why can they not move with it? Now Thuron opened his eyes. They were the color of deep water, dark and patient. Because they are still bleeding, scholar. A wound that deep does not heal in a single generation. It passes from parent to child, from survivor to survivor, until the memory becomes a kind of inheritance. He paused. You pity him. I do, she admitted. His species is a tragedy. They were so close to something greater, and then the Abyssals came. Now they limp through the galaxy, trading scraps of their former potential for survival. Thuron nodded slowly. And yet he is here, in our halls, negotiating on behalf of two species that would rather tear each other apart than share a single rock in the Helios Belt. That is not nothing, Arae. She frowned. I do not understand why he bothers. The conflict is not his. The resources are not his. He gains nothing from this. He gains reputation, Thuron stated. He gains access. He gains the gratitude of species that may one day owe him a favor. The anchorite's voice was calm, almost musical. Humans understand debt. They have built entire civilizations around the concept of obligation. Arae considered this. It was true that the humans' proposal was structured around mutual accountability, each party bound to the others by a web of penalties and incentives. It was not elegant, but it might hold. His plan is ugly, she said finally. It merely manages the problem, it does not solve it. Thuron's smile widened just slightly. And what is wrong with managing a problem, scholar? Not every wound can be healed. Some must simply be tended. She had no answer for that either. The high anchorite rose. His movements were fluid and unhurried. He walked to the edge of the room where a projection of the Helios Belt rotated in slow silence. Its asteroids glittered like scattered coins. He studied it for a long moment. The Draxis and the Arae will not accept your shared access solution, he said. You know this. Arae nodded. The humans said the same. Because the Draxis see territory as absolute, to them sharing is surrender, and the Arae, for all their diplomatic posturing, will not yield ground they believe is theirs by ancestral claim. Thuron touched the projection, and it froze. They will posture, they will threaten, and eventually they will fight. Then our role is to prevent that fight, Arae insisted. That is our purpose. That is what the Lumeth have always done. Thuron turned to face her, and something in his expression shifted. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the filaments of his crest, but Arae had known him for 3 decades, and she recognized it. Prevention is one tool, his voice was quiet. Pruning is another. The word hung in the air. Arae felt a cold thread wind through her chest. High anchorite, she said carefully. What do you mean? Thuron gestured. The projection dissolved. In its place, a new image appeared, a schematic of a device she had never seen before. It was small, no larger than her fist. It seemed to be constructed of interlocking rings of pale crystal. At its center, a point of darkness pulsed with a rhythm that made her eyes ache. Arae stared. What is that? It is a device we built long ago, Thuron explained. During the Silence War, 3 centuries passed. We never used it. We sealed the knowledge away. He paused. It creates a field that quiets the minds of those who use mental abilities. No physical damage, just silence. Arae felt a chill. And now? Now we are building them again? Thuron's voice remained calm, but there was weight beneath it. The Draxis and Arae rely on mental coordination. This field will stop them from thinking clearly. Their ships will drift. Their ground forces will stumble. When it is over, they will wake to find the conflict resolved. They will not remember how it ended. That is not resolution, Arae said. That is subjugation. It is gardening. Thuron spread his hands. Civilizations grow, they spread. They become tangled in their own ambitions, choked by their own violence. A gardener does not let the weeds strangle the garden. A gardener prunes. Arae's hands were trembling. She clasped them together. And the human, Aris Hale, what happens to him? Thuron considered the question with serene attention. Humanity does not share that trait. The device will not affect them. They are irrelevant to this equation. Broken tools, Arae whispered. Exactly. Thuron stepped closer. His voice softened. I do not ask you to approve of this, scholar. I ask you to trust in the elegance of the design. The Draxis and the Arae will exhaust themselves in a pointless war. We step in, apply a clean solution, and both species reset to a more stable state. No one dies, no infrastructure destroyed. The conflict simply ends. And the human? You will keep him occupied, use his negotiations as cover for our fleet movements. Let him believe he is making progress. Thuron placed a hand on her shoulder. His plans are ugly, ours are beautiful. That is the difference between a civilization that survives and a civilization that thrives. Alara looked down at her hands. They had stopped trembling. She did not know if that was a good sign or a bad one. Keep the human busy, scholar, Thuron said. And when the time comes, trust in the garden. He turned and walked back to his cushion. He settled into it with the slow grace of a mountain settling into stone. The audience was over. Alara bowed and left the chamber. In the corridor, the golden light fell around her like a net. She realized she had never felt less free. The conclave's central chamber had never felt smaller. Aris Hale stood at the back of the observation gallery, his hands resting on the polished rail, watching the holographic display of the Helios Belt spin slowly in the air. The Arae delegation occupied the eastern dais, their feathered crests bristling with indignation. Across from them, the Draxis sat in coiled silence, their scales catching the amber light like oil on water. The Lumeth mediator, a senior scholar named Velm, spoke in measured tones, his voice a balm meant to soothe. But Aris saw the cracks. He saw the way the Arae envoy's primary feather twitched. He saw the Draxis commander's tail tap once, twice, 3 times against the stone floor. They were not listening, they were waiting. The alert came without warning. A sharp chime cut through the chamber and the holographic display shifted. A new feed appeared, tactical telemetry from the Helios Belt's outer rim. Aris leaned forward, his jaw tightening. A Draxis scout ship had fired upon an Arae surveyor. The image was grainy. It was relayed through a buoy 3 light seconds away. The Arae vessel was small, unarmed, designed for mapping mineral deposits. The Draxis ship was a corvette, lean and predatory. The exchange lasted 4 seconds. A single plasma bolt, a flash of orange. The Arae surveyor tumbled end over end, its port wing sheared clean off. The Arae envoy shrieked. The sound was high and thin, cutting through the chamber like a blade. She turned on the Draxis commander, her feathers flaring, her voice a cascade of rapid clicks and trills that the translator rendered as, "You have murdered our people." The Draxis commander rose slowly. His voice was a low rumble. The surveyor entered restricted space. The boundary was marked. Your people ignored it. There was no boundary, the Arae envoy shouted. The Lumeth maps show open transit. The room erupted. Accusations flew like shrapnel. The Arae delegation demanded immediate sanctions. The Draxis countered with claims of territorial sovereignty. The Lumeth mediator raised his hands, his face a mask of serene disappointment, but his words were drowned out. Aris watched it all unfold, and he felt a cold certainty settle into his bones. This was not a failure of diplomacy, this was a trigger. Both delegations recalled their representatives within the hour. The Arae envoy departed with a final, venomous look at the Draxis commander. The Draxis commander did not look back. He simply left, his tail swishing once, a gesture of finality. The Lumeth mediator, Velm, addressed the empty chamber. His voice carried through the speakers, calm and sorrowful. The conclave is deeply disappointed by this turn of events. We will withdraw to mediate. We urge both parties to refrain from further hostilities. Aris did not move. He watched Velm walk away, his robes flowing behind him, his steps unhurried. There was no urgency in his gait, no alarm, no frustration. It was a performance, a scripted exit. Aris waited until the chamber was empty. Then he moved. His broker's clearance was a skeleton key. It had taken him years to earn it, years of trading favors and swallowing pride, but it granted him access to the Conclave's general galactic traffic logs. He found a quiet terminal in an alcove off the main corridor, the screen glowing softly in the dim light. He began to search. The logs were dense, filled with the routine chatter of 100 species, cargo manifests, passenger schedules, diplomatic couriers. He filtered by time, looking for the window around the skirmish. He filtered by sector, focusing on the dark space between the Helios Belt and the nearest Lumeth outpost. And he found them. Subtle signatures, high energy, moving through the void without standard transponder codes. They avoided the established lanes, slipping through gaps in the sensor net like ghosts. There were 3 of them, then 4, then 6. Aris cross-referenced the signatures against every known civilian and military pattern in the Conclave's database. Nothing matched. He sat back, his breath slow and steady. He had seen signatures like these before, 50 years ago, during the Abyssal War. He pulled up the old files from Earth's darkest hour. The data was fragmented, pulled from dying ships and broken relays, but he had studied it for years. He knew the shape of it. The energy signature of a Lumeth vessel moving under silent drive was not identical to the abyssal pattern, but it was close enough to make his stomach turn to ice. The Lumeth had been neutral observers during the Abyssal War. They had watched humanity burn. They had offered condolences. They had mediated the ceasefire. And now they were here, watching again. Aris closed the terminal. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. He requested a secure, eyes-only channel to Earth. The connection took 3 minutes to establish. When it came through, the screen flickered and a woman's face appeared. Commander Torin. Her hair was cropped short, gray streaking the temples. Her eyes were hard, the eyes of someone who had seen the worst and survived. Aris, her voice was etched with static, the signal bouncing through relay buoys across light years. Report. He did not waste words. The Lumeth are not mediators, they are predators, I have evidence. Energy signatures matching no known pattern. They are moving ships through dark space, avoiding detection. The skirmish in the belt was staged. It was a provocation. Torin's expression did not change. She listened. When he finished, she nodded once. Authorization is given for Phase 1. Aris blinked. Commander, I don't know what Phase 1 is. You don't need to know, Torin said. Get to the human diplomatic cutter, the Steadfast. It's docked at Conclave Station Base 7. Await a package. And then you follow instructions. Her voice softened just slightly. You've done good work, Aris, now get out. The channel closed. Aris stood in the silent alcove, the screen dark, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He did not know what Phase 1 meant. He did not know what was coming. But he knew Torin. She did not authorize actions lightly. He moved. The corridors of the Conclave were quiet, the golden light casting long shadows. He kept his pace measured, his expression neutral. A human broker walking through alien halls, invisible, forgettable. He reached Bay 7. The Steadfast was a small vessel built for speed and discretion. Its hull was scarred, its paint faded. It looked like a relic. He boarded, sealed the hatch, and waited. The package arrived 20 minutes later. A fast courier drone, no larger than a suitcase, docked with the Steadfast's external airlock. Aris retrieved it, carried it to the cockpit, and opened it. Inside was a small, black case. He unlatched it. The lid opened with a soft hiss. Nestled in foam, gleaming under the cockpit's dim light, was a neural mesh interface. It was crude compared to Lumeth tech. Wires and connectors, a dull metal frame, a single socket designed to interface with the base of the skull. A note was taped to the inside of the lid. Handwritten, Torin's script. Plug in, see the forge. Aris stared at the device. His fingers brushed the cold metal. He had not used a neural mesh since the war. The burnouts, the feedback loops, the men who had come back with their minds scrambled. But he trusted Torin. He lifted the interface, fitted it over his head, and pressed the connector into the port behind his ear. The metal clicked into place. He took a breath. And he saw. The forge was not a place. It was a process. A flood of data poured into his mind, raw and unfiltered. He saw shipyards, not Lumeth shipyards, elegant and quiet, but human shipyards, massive, chaotic, brutal. He saw hulls being welded together on assembly lines, thousands of them stretching into the dark. He saw weapons being stamped out, ammunition being packed, crews being trained in simulations that ran faster than real time. He saw Earth's industrial machine, rebuilt from the ashes of the Abyssal War, roaring back to life. The Lumeth had artisanship, they had patience, they had elegance. Humanity had volume. Aris pulled the interface free. His breath came in ragged gasps. The vision lingered in his mind, burning bright. He understood now. The Lumeth thought they were the hunters. They thought they had found a wounded animal, broken and desperate. But the forge had never stopped. It had only been waiting. Aris opened a channel to Earth. His voice was steady. I've seen it, I understand. Torin's reply came through, clear and cold. Then get ready, Aris. We're going to show them what broken looks like. Ilara stood at the observation dome of the Sanctuary of Clarity. Her hands were clasped behind her back in the posture of patient contemplation. Below her, the Helios Belt stretched across the void like a river of shattered glass. Each chunk of rock and ice caught the distant star's light and threw it back in brilliant, fractured rainbows. It was beautiful. It was about to become a graveyard. The Lumeth Command ship hung in a pocket of empty space behind a dense nebula. Its sensors drank in every detail of the approaching fleets. Arae watched the tactical display overlay the real view. The Draxis were coming from the galactic north. Their ships were shaped like obsidian arrowheads. Engines burned a deep, angry red. They moved in tight formations, precise and brutal. The Arae approached from the south. Their vessels resembled elongated teardrops of polished bone. Wings of translucent membrane caught solar wind. They flew in loose, darting patterns, graceful and erratic. Both fleets were magnificent, both were doomed. High Anchorite Thuron drifted to her side. His robes whispered against the deck. His face was serene, the face of a gardener who has just seen the first shoots break soil. "They will engage within the hour," Thuron said. His voice was soft and sure. Arae nodded. "The human broker's ship is leaving." She gestured to a secondary screen mounted on the curved wall. There a small, boxy vessel was accelerating away from the belt. The Steadfast. It was ugly by Lumeth standards, functional. No curves, no ornamentation, no grace. It looked like a cargo container with engines strapped to the back. "Fleeing the violence," Arae murmured, "as expected." Thuron's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "You sound disappointed." Arae considered the question. "I am uncertain. He saw patterns where we did not. He claimed the Lumeth were hiding something." "He is a wounded animal, Arae. Wounded animals are suspicious of every shadow." "Perhaps." She turned from the human's ship. It was irrelevant. The grand design did not depend on the opinions of a single broker from a broken species. Thuron moved to the central command pedestal. A holographic projection bloomed around him. It showed the 12 Lumeth vessels hidden in the nebula. They were works of art, each one shaped like a crystalline feather. Their hulls were etched with flowing script that told the history of the Lumeth people. They shimmered constantly with a faint distortion in the air around them. That was their phase armor. It made the ships partially intangible to sensors and weapons fire. They were ghosts in the void. But their true teeth were different. Along each vessel's spine, a series of crystal rings were mounted. These rings could generate a focused wave of mental interference. Arae had studied the technology for years. The wave targeted species with telepathic or empathic sensitivities. It would be devastating to both the Draxis and the Arae. The effect was immediate and permanent stillness. The body lived. The mind went blank. It was the ultimate, elegant solution. Thuron began the final briefing. His tone carried the weight of a sermon. "The Draxis and Arae will exhaust themselves in the belt. Their hatred will burn hot and it will burn bright. They will commit every ship to the engagement. They will leave themselves no escape." Arae watched the tactical projection. Red and blue icons were converging on the central cluster of asteroids. The first warning shots had already been fired. Particle beams sliced through the darkness. "When their fury reaches its peak," Thuron continued, "we will activate the rings. The wave will blanket the entire Helios Belt. Every Arae and Draxis within range will fall still. Their ships will drift, uncrewed, intact." "War averted," Arae said quietly. "Balance restored," Thuron agreed. "Knowledge gained." Thuron smiled. It was a gentle smile, the smile of a teacher watching a student understand a difficult lesson. "Precisely. Their vessels will be ours to study. Their weapons, their navigation systems, their cultural artifacts. We will learn everything they know, and we will use that knowledge to prevent future conflicts." Arae felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was the Lumeth way, not brute force, not messy compromise, but a clean, surgical intervention that served all parties. The Draxis and Arae would not die. They would simply stop. Their societies would collapse, yes. Their families would grieve, but they would recover. In time, they would thank the Lumeth for the peace they had imposed. She looked back at the main display. The first salvos of the Helios Belt War were lighting up the void. It was the conflict she had predicted. Draxis ships fired plasma cannons. These weapons shot bolts of superheated gas that seared through armor. The orange streaks painted the darkness. In response, Arae kinetic lances launched streams of white-hot metal. Each round accelerated to devastating speed. The asteroids themselves were beginning to fracture under the bombardment. It was ugly, it was violent, it was exactly what the Lumeth had predicted. "The human," Arae said, glancing at the secondary screen. The Steadfast was now a tiny blip on the edge of the system. He will report this. He will tell Earth that the Lumeth stood by and watched. Thuron shook his head slowly. The humans are irrelevant to this design. They have no fleet in the belt. They have no claim to the resources. They are observers, nothing more. His proposal, Arae pressed. Staggered leases, joint patrols, arbitration. It was ugly, but it was comprehensive. He was trying to solve the problem without violence. And now we see the result of his approach, Thuron said, gesturing to the blazing battlefield. He offered a tangled web of compromises. The Draxis and Arae rejected it. They chose war. We are simply cleaning up their mess. Arae fell silent. She knew Thuron was right. The human solution had been a patchwork of concessions, a desperate attempt to hold together something that was already broken. It was the kind of solution a wounded species would propose, a species that had lost everything and would do anything to avoid losing more. But she could not shake the image of Aris Hale's face, the way he had looked at her when he said the Lumeth were hiding something, the certainty in his eyes. She turned away from the display. How long until the rings are ready? Thuron checked the system status. The arrays are charged. We are waiting for optimal fleet density, 20 minutes, perhaps less. 20 minutes. The battle would rage for 20 more minutes and then it would end. Not with a treaty, not with a compromise, but with a wave of silence. Arae moved to a secondary console and pulled up the human ship's trajectory. The Steadfast was still accelerating away from the belt. Its course was set for the nearest jump point. It would be out of the ring's range before the wave activated. She felt a pang of something, not guilt. Guilt was too strong. It was more like regret. Regret that the humans would see only the aftermath. They would see the Lumeth salvaging the drifting ships of 2 dead fleets, and they would draw their own conclusions. But that was the cost of peace. Not everyone would understand. Thuron's voice broke through her thoughts. Arae, the Draxis flagship is engaging the Arae command vessel. It is time. She turned back to the main display. The battle had reached its crescendo. Ships were dying on both sides. The void was filled with debris and radiation and the silent screams of thousands of dying souls. And behind the nebula, the Lumeth fleet waited, beautiful, patient, invisible. Arae watched the tactical display count down, 18 minutes, 17, 16. She thought of the human's ship growing smaller and smaller on her screen. She thought of his face, his certainty. And she wondered, for just a moment, if the elegant solution was always the right one. Then she pushed the thought aside. The rings were ready. The design was complete. She watched the battle burn, and she waited. The neural mesh was cold against Aris Hale's temples. He had worn interface jacks before, the kind that rested on the skin and whispered information like a patient teacher. This was not that. This was a crown of frozen mercury, and when it activated, it did not ask permission. The connection slammed into his consciousness. Aris gasped. His hands gripped the armrest of the pilot's chair, knuckles white. For a moment, he was nowhere. Then he was everywhere. The Steadfast's cramped cockpit dissolved, replaced by a field of light and data that pressed against his skull from the inside. He saw through 1,000 sensor feeds. He felt the vibration of 1,000,000 engines thrumming through vacuum, a distant, synchronized heartbeat. His own breathing became a foreign rhythm, too slow, too human against the pulse of the machine. The screen before him flickered and died. It was unnecessary now. The strategic map of human space bloomed directly behind his eyes, a web of connections and trajectories that stretched across the darkness. He had seen the official charts, the map the galaxy believed. A handful of systems, a wounded species clinging to its cradle, licking old scars. This was not that map. The web was dense. It was sprawling. It was alive with movement. Aris watched as nodes lit up across the void, each one a forge, a shipyard, a hidden anchor point. They were buried in dead systems, the kind the galaxy had written off as exhausted and empty. They were carved into the mantles of gas giants, invisible beneath layers of ammonia and hydrogen. They were nested inside hollowed asteroids, drifting through the dark like sleeping giants. And they were waking. The forge had never been broken. It had been retooling. Aris felt a pressure behind his eyes, the weight of scale pressing against his humanity. He tried to focus, to parse the flood of information into something his mind could hold. The ships appeared first. Not a dozen exquisite warships, the kind the Lumeth crafted over generations, each one a work of art and science. Not 100. Thousands. They were not beautiful. They were angular, functional, grim. Their hulls bore no ornament, no sweeping curves, no polished crystal. They were slabs of metal and purpose, welded together by automated arms that never tired. Aris saw the carriers first. These were massive wedges, their hulls covered with launch bays. Each carrier held scores of drone fighters, small unmanned craft designed for combat. The drones were smaller, simpler, disposable. They did not need pilots. They did not need rescue. They needed only to fly, to fight, and to be replaced. He saw the freighters next. They were bulk haulers, their cargo holds gutted and refitted for war. Mass driver batteries ran along their spines. These were crude weapons that fired slugs of refined metal at velocities that could punch through a cruiser's hull. They were ugly. They were effective. And then he saw the factory ships. They were the heart of the web. These were mobile industrial platforms, each one capable of anchoring to an asteroid and stripping it to nothing. They ate rock and ice, digesting raw material through internal refineries that ran hot and constant. They spat out munitions, hull plates, replacement parts. They were mouths that never closed, stomachs that never filled. Aris tried to count. He failed. The numbers slipped past him, too large, too fast. He felt the mesh feeding him summaries, updates, projections, production curves that climbed like vertical walls, supply lines that stretched across light years, each one stocked and moving. The galaxy thought humanity was broken. They had looked at the scars of the Abyssal War and seen a species that would never recover. They had not looked closely enough. The mesh pulsed, and a new stream of data pushed into Aris's awareness. Mission parameters, updated directives. He had come to the Helios Belt to broker peace, to find a compromise between posturing empires. That was what the Lumeth believed. That was what he had allowed them to believe. The truth was different. He was not here to stop a war. He was here to offer a deal. The Arae and the Draxis were about to tear each other apart. The Lumeth were waiting in the dark, their crystalline ships armed with psionic disruptors, ready to shut down both species the moment they were weak enough. Aris saw the patterns now, the threads that connected the skirmish, the traffic logs, the silent drive signatures he had discovered. The Lumeth had orchestrated this. They had lit the fuse. And humanity had been watching the whole time. Aris's mission update crystallized into a single, brutal directive. He was to return to the Helios Belt. He was to find the surviving leaders of both species, assuming any still lived after the first salvos. He was to offer them a choice. Annihilation by the Lumeth, or alliance with humanity. There was no third option. Aris felt the mesh disengage, peeling back from his consciousness like a tide retreating from a shore. He was alone again, just a man in a cockpit, his hands still gripping the armrest, his heart still racing. The cold of the neural mesh lingered on his temples. He reached up and touched the metal, feeling the faint residual warmth of his own skin. The steadfast navigation console blinked, waiting for input. Aris looked at the controls, then at the viewport ahead. The stars were cold and patient. They had seen empires rise and fall. They would see this too. He entered the new coordinates. The ship's humble warp drive hummed to life, its glow casting a pale blue light across the cockpit. The engine was not elegant. It was not fast by galactic standards, but it was reliable. It was human. The steadfast turned, not toward home, not toward safety. It turned back toward the heart of the Helios Belt, where the Arae and Draxis fleets were already exchanging fire, where the Lumeth were waiting in their silent ships, where the first act of a new war was being written. Aris watched the stars shift as the ship changed course. The sanctuary of clarity hummed with quiet anticipation. Alara stood beside Thuron at the command dais. Her hands were clasped behind her back, watching the tactical display. The Helios Belt blazed with light as the Arae and Draxis fleets tore into each other. Energy beams lanced between elegant hulls. Missiles traced bright arcs through the debris field. It was beautiful in the way a forest fire was beautiful, destructive, yes, but necessary for renewal. Thuron's voice was calm, almost reverent. They have spent their fury. Look at their formations, scholar. They are ragged, exhausted. Now we act. He raised one long-fingered hand. The gesture was slow, deliberate, like a priest offering a blessing. All ships decloak, power the arrays. Alara held her breath. Outside the dome, the nebula rippled. 12 Lumeth vessels shimmered into existence. Their hulls were pearl-white and seamless, emerging from the gas and dust like spirits taking form. They were not warships. They were instruments. Surgical tools designed to cut out a tumor without damaging the body around it. The arrays hummed to life. Alara felt it in her teeth, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to bypass her ears and settle directly in her skull. The technology was elegant. It targeted only those with psychic abilities, only the minds of the Arae and Draxis. It would leave their ships intact, their infrastructure untouched. Only the commanders would fall. Only the will to fight would be erased. "Fire," Thuron said. The arrays discharged. A silent wave expanded from the Lumeth ships. It was invisible, carrying a frequency that could not be heard but could be felt. It rolled across the battlefield like a sigh. On the display, the Arae and Draxis capital ships went dark. One by one, their weapons fell silent. Their engines died. Their formation lost cohesion, drifting like corpses in a current. The smaller craft, their command links severed, began to wander. The battle was over. Thuron smiled. It was a thin, satisfied expression, the look of a surgeon who had just completed a perfect procedure. "Record the telemetry," he said. "Catalog every neurological signature. This data will be invaluable for future." "High anchorite," the sensor officer's voice cracked. It was not a tone Alara had ever heard from a Lumeth. "Anomaly, new contacts." Thuron's smile faltered. "Explain." The officer's hands moved across the console, pulling up data streams. "Multiple warp signatures, emerging from points we have not mapped. They are everywhere." Alara's eyes found the display. Her stomach dropped. The contacts were small. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. They poured out of warp like water bursting through a dam. Their signatures were crude. The warp drives were Tier 3 technology, slow, inefficient, ancient. The energy readings were laughably low. But there were so many. "Identify them," Thuron ordered, his voice losing its serene edge. The officer hesitated. "They are human, civilian freighters, patrol craft, refitted cargo haulers. The signatures match nothing in our military databases." Thuron stared at the display. The human ships were moving into formation. They were positioning themselves between the Lumeth fleet and the disabled Arae and Draxis vessels. They formed a wall, a sheer, stupid, impossible wall of mismatched metal and patched armor. "What are they doing?" Alara whispered. The answer came a moment later. The human ships opened fire. It was not elegant, it was not precise. There was only volume. Kinetic slugs, thousands of them, screamed through the void. These were dense projectiles that relied on sheer mass to penetrate armor. Missiles, crude and unguided, launched in waves. They flew without guidance, hoping to overwhelm the defenses. Laser batteries that should have been retired a century ago blazed with desperate, overcharged fury. These were outdated weapons pushed to their limit. It was a storm of metal and fire and brute force. Alara watched the first volley hit the Lumeth flagship's phase armor. The armor shimmered, activating its partial intangibility field. It destabilized the energy of the attacks, scattering the laser beams, deflecting the heat. It was designed for this. It was designed to counter precise, high-energy weapons. But it could not handle the mass. The kinetic slugs did not care about frequency or resonance. They were simply heavy. They struck the hull with raw, physical force. The phase armor destabilized the energy of each impact, but it could not destabilize the momentum. The armor held for 3 seconds, then it shredded. Alarms screamed across the sanctuary of clarity. "Shields failing on the resplendent Thought," the officer reported. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, casualties reported." Thuron grabbed the edge of the command dais. His knuckles were white. "How? Their technology is primitive. Their weapons are obsolete." Alara's voice was hollow. "High anchorite, it is not about technology. It is about volume." She understood now. The Lumeth had built their civilization around precision. Every ship was a work of art, every weapon a carefully tuned instrument. They had never needed to face a foe that simply threw more metal at the problem than the problem could absorb. The human ships did not stop firing. They could not stop. They were not built for elegance. They were built for endurance, for attrition, for the ugly, grinding work of survival. Alara's gaze drifted across the display. She found a single ship moving through the chaos. It was boxy, ugly. Its hull was scarred and patched. It was the Steadfast, the human broker's vessel. It was heading for the crippled Arae flagship. Thuron saw it too, his face twisted. That ship, the human, he is going to the Arae. "He is going to make an offer," Alara said. The words felt cold in her mouth. She understood the shape of it now. Aris Hale had known. He had known the Lumeth were orchestrating the war. He had known they would spring their trap. And he had planned for it, not with clever countermeasures or superior technology, with sheer, overwhelming numbers, with a wall of ships that could not be outmaneuvered, only endured. The human fleet was still firing. The Lumeth ships were breaking. One by one, their phase armor failed. Their elegant hulls crumpled under the relentless barrage. The sanctuary of clarity shuddered as a glancing blow struck its forward section. Alara felt the floor vibrate beneath her feet. The crystalline tree in the alcove, the 70-year testament to patience, trembled. A single branch snapped and fell. "This is not a pruning," she whispered. Thuron turned to her, his serene mask shattered. "What?" She met his eyes. She saw fear there. Fear and confusion and the dawning realization that everything they believed was wrong. "This is a stampede," she said. Docking collar groaned as it sealed against the Arae flagship's hull. Aris Hale felt the vibration through his boots, a deep metallic shudder that traveled up his spine. The neural mesh pulsed against his scalp, warm and alive, feeding him quiet status updates from the steadfast. He cycled the airlock and stepped into a curved corridor lit by soft amber panels. Bodies lay slumped against the walls, dozens of them. Arae warriors, their iridescent plumage dull, their limbs folded at unnatural angles. Catatonic, the Lumeth disruptor had simply turned them off. He reached the bridge. The doors were sealed. The neural mesh found the access panel's frequency, and a quick pulse of current slid them open. Inside, the Arae command crew lay sprawled across their stations. Aris walked to the main console, a beautiful thing of flowing organic curves, and pulled a data spike from his belt. It was a cylinder of raw steel, rough machined, with a single blunt prong. He jammed it into the console's access port. The ship's system screamed for a moment, then fell silent as he uploaded the damping frequency. It was not elegant. It was a sonic hammer to the Lumeth scalpel, a low hum built in the deck plating, then died. One by one, the Arae began to stir. The captain, still in her chair, gasped. Her eyes snapped open and found him. "You," she rasped, her voice hoarse. "You did this." "I stopped it," Aris said. He brought up the tactical feed. It showed the human wall of ships, battered but holding. It showed the Lumeth fleet reeling. "The Lumeth started this. Now you have a choice. Stand down from the Draxis conflict, accept human protection. In return, we get mining rights in the Helios Belt and a mutual defense pact." On the Sanctuary of Clarity, Alara watched the same feed in horror. Thuron was frantically trying to rally his exquisite, damaged ships. She saw a human munitions freighter, its hull breached, ram a Lumeth cruiser. The explosion was catastrophic. It was not war, she realized with a sickening clarity. It was an industrial equation. They were trading a cheap, mass-produced freighter for a vessel that had taken a century to build, and they had thousands more. The Arae captain watched the display, her beak hanging open. Aris's voice was calm. "The alternative is we leave, and the Lumeth finish what they started." The captain closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fight was gone. "I accept." An hour later, Aris stood on the bridge of the Draxis flagship. He had stepped over reptilian bodies, plugged in the same crude spike, and woken the same enraged commander. He showed him the same feed. He made him the same offer. The commander's claws gouged furrows in the deck plating, but he nodded. Accepted. Back on the steadfast, Aris opened a direct channel to the Sanctuary of Clarity. Alara's face appeared on the screen, her serene mask shattered. Behind her, Thuron stood frozen, staring at the ruin of his grand design. "Scholar Alara," Aris said. He looked tired. A thin cut ran across his cheek, still bleeding. "The negotiations are concluded. The broken forge is open for business." He leaned closer to the pickup, his voice dropping but losing none of its weight. "Tell your people this. You tried to prune the garden, but you forgot about the weeds. We grow everywhere, and we do not need your light to thrive." The channel closed. Alara stared at the blank screen. Outside, the human ships continued their advance, relentless and unhurried, a tide that did not know how to stop. The elegant solution had failed. The ugly, brutal, human one had prevailed. She turned back to the dome. The human ships kept coming, and for the first time in her long, placid life, she understood what it meant to be afraid.